The Mafia boss's blood was all over Jasmine's hands, and if she didn't stop the bleeding in the next 60 seconds, he'd die, and so would she. But this story doesn't start with life and death. It starts with a wallet, $5,000 in cash, and one phone call that changed everything. Hit subscribe, drop a comment on what you'd do if you found a crime lord's wallet, and smash that like button because you're about to see how one honest choice can trap you in a world you can't escape. Jasmine Carter lived her life in 12-hour shifts and overdue library books. At 23, her only ambition was to survive nursing school without drowning in debt. But on a bitter winter night, she discovered a wallet, supple black leather stuffed with enough cash to erase every financial worry she'd ever had. The owner was Park Jin-woo, a man whose influence painted the city's underground in shades of fear and respect. What Jasmine didn't realize as she dialed that number from the diner's sticky payphone was that she hadn't simply found something lost. She'd walked straight into a carefully orchestrated trial. Returning the wallet was honest, but it was also the first irrevocable step into a realm governed by a ruthless boss who only values those he can bind to his world. Jasmine Carter was drowning, but she'd learned to call it swimming. At 23, she split her existence between the fluorescent-lit chaos of Ray's all-night diner and the suffocating pressure of her nursing program at Metro Community College. She understood money in a way most people didn't, as something that slipped through your fingers no matter how tightly you held on, usually in the form of crumpled singles left beside cold coffee and half-eaten pie. Her hair, twisted into protective braids that fell past her shoulders, caught the weak overhead lights, and her smile, when it appeared, cut through the exhaustion that clung to everyone who worked the graveyard shift. She carried a vision that kept her moving forward, scrubs that actually fit, a job saving lives instead of serving them, and a bank account that didn't make her stomach drop every time she checked it. That dream was her compass, but the journey felt endless, a marathon through minimum wage and maximum debt. It was 2:30 in the morning when the diner finally emptied. Jasmine wiped down the last table, her mind already rehearsing the cardiac cycle she needed to memorize before her 7 o'clock exam. Her legs ached with that deep, bone-tired heaviness that no amount of rest could fully cure. She glanced toward booth 12 in the corner, studying the space where her final customer had sat. He'd been impossible to ignore. Dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her semester's tuition, the man had possessed an unsettling stillness, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that catalogued everything, hair swept back with precision. His presence had felt like a held breath in the normally relaxed atmosphere of Ray's. He'd ordered only black coffee, touched it twice, paid with a crisp $100 bill without requesting change, and departed without sound. He moved like expensive smoke, leaving only silence in his wake. As Jasmine cleared the table, wiping away the water ring from his untouched coffee cup, her fingers brushed against something wedged deep between the worn vinyl cushion and the wall. A wallet. Not the battered nylon kind most people carried, but something crafted from buttery black leather with visible stitching, substantial and unmistakably costly. The weight of it felt wrong for a place like Ray's. Too refined, too dangerous. A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the weak heating. This object belonged to a different world entirely. She slid into the booth and opened it carefully. Inside, she found no mess of receipts or customer loyalty cards, none of the everyday debris of normal life. Instead, there were 2 neat stacks of $100 bills secured with a platinum money clip engraved with an intricate pattern she couldn't decipher. Beside the cash sat a single government ID card. Name, Park Jin-woo. The photograph showed the man who'd just left. his expression severe, his dark eyes radiating an intensity that made her uncomfortable even through the laminated plastic. The address was in Westridge Heights, a gated enclave where security gates cost more than most people's homes. There was also a matte black card embossed with a gold symbol she didn't recognize. No bank logo, no company name, suggesting membership in something private and powerful. $5,000. She let that figure sink in. That was 2 full semesters paid, textbooks for a year, maybe even a reliable car to replace the bus routes that added 2 hours to her daily commute. It was her future, condensed into neat rectangular stacks, the solution to every sleepless, stress-filled night, her ticket out of this exhausting cycle. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her head, the woman who'd raised her in a cramped West Side apartment after her parents passed. Baby girl, you can't build a life on someone else's foundation. Your peace comes from your own integrity. That principle had been hammered into her since childhood, and it held even now, even when her feet ached and her bank account was gasping. She closed the wallet with a decisive snap. She had to return it. But the sheer amount of money and the man's cold, calculating presence suggested this wasn't a simple mistake. It felt deliberate, like a trap. She wouldn't trust Ray, her manager, a man who'd pocket it without hesitation and claim ignorance. Mailing it seemed reckless with this much cash involved. Hidden in a small interior pocket, she found a plain business card. No company name, no title, just Korean characters and a phone number. Jasmine walked to the counter, the wallet heavy in her hand, like a stone. She picked up the greasy diner phone and dialed. It was 2:45 in the morning. Someone answered on the first ring. The voice was male, harsh, and immediate. "Speak." "Hi, my name is Jasmine Carter. I'm a server at Ray's All-Night Diner on 5th Avenue. I believe one of your people, a Mr. Park, Jin-woo, left his wallet here tonight." Silence. It stretched for what felt like minutes, heavy and assessing, as if the person on the other end was running a complete background check based purely on her voice. It didn't feel like a pause. It felt like surveillance. "Hold." Seconds later, a different voice came through the line. Deep, smooth, controlled. The voice of Park Jin-woo himself. He spoke with a refined Korean accent and an authority that made it clear he expected obedience. "This is Park. You have my property, Miss Carter." "Yes, sir." "You left it in booth 12. It has your ID and cash inside. I wanted to call so I could return it to you properly." "You could have kept it," Park stated flatly, without emotion, an observation of fact. "The contents are significant. You work in a diner. I understand your circumstances, your limitations." The casual dismissal stung, but Jasmine kept her voice steady. "It's yours, Mr. Park. My circumstances don't change right from wrong. I can hold it here until morning, or you can send someone now." "You will hold nothing," he commanded, his tone sharpening like a blade. "You will remain exactly where you are. Do not let that wallet leave your sight. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "A driver will arrive in 12 minutes. You will hand the wallet to him directly. You will not engage in conversation beyond confirmation. And Miss Carter," his voice dropped to something darker, more dangerous, "you did not examine the contents. Confirm this." Jasmine knew she was being tested, knew the truth would complicate everything. She made a calculated decision, a small lie wrapped in survival instinct. "Confirmed, sir." It remained closed. "Good. Your honesty, or your discretion, will be noted. Wait there." The line went dead. Jasmine replaced the phone, her hand trembling. Honesty or discretion will be noted. She'd just lied to a man who clearly operated outside conventional rules. The wallet on the counter felt radioactive now. She finished closing out the register, locked the front door, and sat on a stool near the window. The streetlights outside cast long shadows across the checkered floor. She knew she'd done the fundamentally right thing by calling, but she also knew, with absolute certainty, that by choosing integrity, she'd just signed her name to something dangerous. 12 minutes later, a vehicle pulled up outside Ray's, a massive black Range Rover with tinted windows that seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than reflect it. The vehicle idled silently, a statement of power and immunity in the quiet neighborhood. The passenger door opened, and a man emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black overcoat over what looked like tactical clothing. He moved with controlled efficiency, his face expressionless, his eyes scanning the street with professional vigilance. He pushed open the diner door, the bell's cheerful chime jarring in the tense silence. Jasmine Carter. His voice was flat, emotionless, a machine executing a command. "That's me." She stood and slid the wallet across the counter toward his gloved hand. "Everything's inside." The man didn't move immediately. Like the voice on the phone, he subjected her to a thorough visual assessment, examining her tired eyes, her clean uniform, the controlled fear in her posture. He was searching for tells, for any indication of deception or theft. The scrutiny was intense enough to make her skin prickle. Finally, he reached out and picked up the wallet. He didn't open it. He simply weighed it in his palm, a subtle gesture that suggested intimate familiarity with its original contents. He slipped it into his coat. "Mr. Park acknowledges your promptness." He reached into another pocket and placed a thick, cream-colored envelope on the counter where the wallet had been. His appreciation. "I don't want payment," Jasmine said quickly, raising her hands. Really, it was just the right thing to do. "The instruction is not optional," the man said, his voice gaining an edge. "Accept the exchange. It concludes the transaction." He gave a curt nod, formal, cold, devoid of warmth, and turned, exiting the diner without another word. 30 seconds later, the Range Rover pulled away, disappearing into the night like it had never existed. Jasmine stared at the empty space, then slowly reached for the envelope. It was heavy, weighted with something more than paper. Inside, she found $3,000 in pristine, sequential bills, more than she made in 2 months of exhausting work. But there was also a folded note, written on expensive ivory cardstock in elegant, confident handwriting. "Miss Carter, a curious choice. You have prioritized principle over survival in a world that rarely rewards such decisions. Your name is now associated with a quality I value. Do not spend these funds carelessly. Do not discuss this with anyone. You have passed preliminary evaluation. Await further contact. Park J.W. Preliminary evaluation. Jasmine sank onto the stool, the note slipping from her fingers. She hadn't just returned a wallet. She'd been watched, tested, and catalogued. Park Jin-woo wasn't some wealthy businessman. He was something far more dangerous. Someone who ran tests on strangers. Someone who rewarded loyalty because he required it absolutely. The money wasn't a gift. It was a hook. The next 3 weeks were a waking nightmare. She felt watched constantly, her nerves frayed from perpetual vigilance. She stopped taking her usual route home, started varying her schedule, looking over her shoulder at every turn. She told no one about the money, locking the cash in a fireproof box hidden in the back of her closet. The money felt too dangerous to touch, like marked bills in a crime drama. She threw herself into her studies with manic intensity, trying to bury the anxiety under anatomy diagrams and pharmacology charts. Her exhaustion deepened, her sleep disrupted by dreams of cold voices and empty streets. The contact came without warning, in the way that proved no amount of caution could keep her safe from Park Jin-woo's reach. Jasmine was hunched over her anatomy textbook in the library's quiet corner, trying to memorize the branches of the brachial plexus for the third time. It was past 11, and the building was nearly empty except for a few other exhausted students scattered across different floors. She was so absorbed in her diagrams that she didn't register the footsteps approaching, didn't notice the way the girl studying 2 tables over suddenly gathered her things and moved to a different section. What she did notice was the sudden weight of attention, the feeling of being watched. She glanced up and her stomach dropped. Park Jin-woo stood near the periodical section about 20 feet away, partially hidden by a support column. He wore all black, turtleneck, slacks, and a long wool coat that made him look like he'd stepped out of a noir film. His hands were in his pockets, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were locked on her with unsettling focus. He wasn't trying to hide his presence. He was waiting for her to notice him. Jasmine's pulse kicked into overdrive. She marked her page with shaking hands and slowly stood, her chair scraping too loud in the hushed space. She walked toward him, each step feeling like a small surrender. When she got close enough, he gestured with a minimal tilt of his head toward the stairwell that led to the basement archive level, a section rarely used this late at night. She followed him down the concrete stairs, her footsteps echoing. The basement was cooler, dimmer, lined with compact shelving units full of old journals and theses nobody had touched in years. Jin-woo stopped in a small alcove between 2 shelving units, far enough from any security cameras. "You've been disciplined," he said without preamble, his voice low and measured. "The money sits untouched in your account. You haven't told anyone. You've changed your routine, different coffee shops, varied schedules. Good instincts." The fact that he'd been monitoring her so closely made her skin crawl. "You've been following me. I've been protecting my investment," he corrected. "That night at Ray's wasn't an accident, Miss Carter. The wallet was placed deliberately in that booth after I observed you for 30 minutes. I needed to understand who would respond with integrity when given the opportunity. For easy money." Jasmine felt anger flare through her fear. "You set me up. This was all some kind of game?" "It was an assessment," he replied calmly. "I left that wallet in a location where multiple people would have access to it. You were the 7th person to see it." "The others?" He shrugged slightly. "They made different choices. You made the right one." "The right one for you, you mean?" "The right one for you," he countered, "because it brought you to my attention, and that means opportunity." He pulled out a phone, not a smartphone, but a basic flip phone, probably a burner. He held it out to her. "I can fund your entire nursing education, every semester, every textbook, every certification exam. You graduate with 0 debt and complete financial freedom." Jasmine stared at the phone like it was a weapon. "What do you want in return?" "Availability and silence," Jin-woo said simply. "People in my organization get injured, sometimes seriously. They cannot risk hospital records or police reports. I need a medical professional I can call at any hour who will come without questions, treat the injury competently, and forget everything they saw." "You want me to be your private underground medic," Jasmine said flatly. "I want you to be my medical resource. Not available to competitors, not for hire to others. Mine exclusively." His dark eyes held hers. "In exchange, I remove every financial obstacle between you and your career goals. You'll have the freedom to focus purely on becoming an exceptional nurse practitioner." Jasmine's mind raced through the implications. This was insane, criminal. everything she'd worked for could evaporate if she was caught treating gang members or worse. But the alternative was drowning in debt for the next decade, working herself to exhaustion, always one emergency away from losing everything. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Then you refuse. You walk away tonight, and we never speak again. The 3,000 I already gave you is yours. Consider it payment for your honesty." He paused. "But understand that this offer exists only in this moment. Once you leave, it's gone. What happens if I agree and then want out later?" Something cold and dangerous flickered in his expression. "Then you would learn why breaking my trust is not something people survive professionally or otherwise." He let that sink in, then added, "But I don't believe you're someone who makes commitments lightly. That's precisely why I'm making this offer." Jasmine looked at the phone in his hand. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "You can't build a life on someone else's foundation." But wasn't student debt someone else's foundation too? Wasn't she already building her future on loans from corporations that saw her as nothing more than a revenue stream? "I need boundaries," she said finally. "I won't do anything that violates basic medical ethics. I won't participate in torture. I won't treat someone if they tell me they're planning to hurt innocent people." Jin-woo considered this, then nodded slowly. "Acceptable. I need healing, not interrogation. I have other specialists for different purposes. And when I'm treating someone, my medical judgment is final. You don't override me, you don't rush me, you don't tell me to stop treatment because someone's asking questions." A hint of something, respect maybe, flickered in his eyes. "When someone is in your care, you have complete authority." "Agreed." Jasmine reached out and took the phone. It was heavier than expected, solid and cold in her palm. "How does this work?" "That phone is for my calls only. Keep it charged and with you always. I'll deposit funds into an account. The information is already programmed into the phone's notes. Withdraw what you need for school expenses. I'll replenish it each semester." He pulled a plain white business card from his pocket and handed it to her. "This number is for emergencies only. If you're ever in danger, any kind of danger, you call it. I protect what belongs to me, and you now belong to me in a professional capacity." The possessive phrasing should have frightened her more than it did. "Just like that? Just like that?" He turned toward the stairs, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Carter. I chose you because you have integrity under pressure. Don't disappoint me." Then he was gone, disappearing up the stairs with barely a sound, leaving Jasmine alone in the dim basement, clutching a phone that felt like both a lifeline and a chain. She didn't go back to studying. She went home, the phone burning a hole in her jacket pocket. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she checked the phone's notes and found account information and a balance that made her lightheaded. $38,000. Enough for everything she needed and more. By that afternoon, she'd made her decision. She withdrew tuition money and paid her entire semester in full for the first time in her academic life. The weight that lifted from her shoulders was immediately replaced by a different kind of pressure, the knowledge that she now owed something to someone very dangerous. The next morning, she gave her notice at Ray's. Her manager barely looked up. "Finally found yourself a sugar daddy?" he asked cynically. "Private scholarship," Jasmine lied smoothly, and he didn't push. Walking out of that diner for the last time felt like shedding old skin. No more grease burns, no more harassment from drunk customers, no more closing shifts that destroyed her study schedule. But underneath the relief was a new weight, invisible but just as heavy. Jasmine was strategic with the money. She paid tuition and bought required materials, but she didn't upgrade her lifestyle dramatically. She moved to a slightly better apartment closer to campus, nothing flashy, just safer and quieter. When friends asked how she was managing, she told them about a nursing scholarship for first-generation students. Everyone believed her, because the alternative seemed impossible. The encrypted phone lived in her nightstand drawer, always charged. She checked it compulsively, morning, noon, night, sometimes waking at 3 a.m. just to make sure it still had battery. She told herself she was being paranoid. Maybe Jin-woo had just wanted to do something generous for someone who'd been honest. Maybe the phone would never ring. She dove into her studies with renewed intensity. Without work shifts fracturing her schedule, she actually had time to absorb the material instead of just memorizing it desperately before exams. Her grades improved. Her clinical instructors commented on her unusual composure during high-pressure simulations. She started to allow herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have this, the education, the future, the career, without the other shoe dropping. 3 months passed. Then 4. The account was replenished at the semester's start, exactly as promised, but otherwise there was no contact. Jasmine started to relax fractionally, started to believe maybe the arrangement was exactly what it appeared to be. Financial backing in exchange for theoretical availability she'd never actually need to provide. She should have known better. It was 2:53 a.m. on a Thursday when the phone finally rang. The sound was harsh and unfamiliar. She'd never actually heard its ringtone before. Jasmine jolted awake, her heart immediately racing, and fumbled for the phone. "Hello?" "Jasmine, listen carefully." Jin-woo's voice was tight, controlled, but she could hear the urgency underneath. "A car is coming. It will arrive in 7 minutes. Wear scrubs. Dark, no logos or identifying marks. Bring only that phone, nothing else. Do you understand? Wait, what's 6 minutes now? Someone critical to me is injured badly. I need you immediately. I need to know what kind of injury, what supplies. Everything you need will be available. What I need is you, now. 6 minutes." The line went dead. Jasmine scrambled out of bed, her hands shaking as she pulled on the navy scrubs she kept pressed and ready for clinical rotations. Her mind was already shifting into triage mode, even as fear made her clumsy. She grabbed the phone, shoved her feet into sneakers, and ran downstairs without bothering to lock her apartment door. A black sedan was already idling at the curb, not the Range Rover from before, but something sleeker and more expensive. The rear door opened as she approached. She climbed in, and the vehicle pulled away before she'd even fastened her seatbelt. The driver was a woman this time, stone-faced and silent. They drove north, leaving the city limits entirely, heading into areas Jasmine had never been, where estates hid behind high walls and mature trees. Finally, they turned onto an unmarked road and approached gates that opened automatically, revealing a sprawling modern compound of glass and stone. They drove past the main entrance to a side garage. The door closed behind them before Jasmine even exited the vehicle. A man in tactical gear was waiting. "This way, quickly." She followed him through pristine hallways that smelled of antiseptic and money. He led her to what looked like a private medical facility, a fully equipped surgical suite that would put many hospital ERs to shame. And there, in the center of controlled chaos, was Jin-woo. He'd stripped down to a black t-shirt, his forearms covered in blood, his hands pressing a compress against the chest of an elderly Korean man lying on the surgical table. The man's face was grey, his breathing labored and shallow. Monitors beeped urgent warnings about low blood pressure and oxygen saturation. Jin-woo's eyes snapped to Jasmine when she entered, and the naked relief in his expression was startling. Stab wound to the upper chest, he said, his voice clipped and professional despite the blood. 3 hours ago. I've controlled the external bleeding, but he's losing blood internally. I can't take him to a hospital. I won't. A woman in surgical scrubs appeared from an adjacent supply room. 50s, competent-looking, carrying a tray of instruments. I'm Dr. Chen, trauma surgeon. You're the student? Jasmine Carter, nursing program, Jasmine said, already moving to the scrub sink. What do you need? Someone who won't panic, Dr. Chen said bluntly. Can you handle that? Jasmine looked at the elderly man on the table, at Jin-woo's desperate eyes, at the monitors screaming that someone was dying. She thought of every simulation, every textbook, every hour she'd spent preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Yes, tell me what to do. For the next 2.5 hours, Jasmine worked alongside Dr. Chen in the most intense medical experience of her life. She managed IV lines, monitored vitals, anticipated needed instruments, held retractors steady while the surgeon explored the wound and repaired a partially severed artery. Jin-woo stayed throughout, silent and focused, doing exactly what he was told, holding lights, applying pressure, never interfering despite the obvious fear etched in every line of his body. The patient, Mr. Yoon, she learned, had suffered significant vascular and tissue damage from a blade that had come within millimeters of his heart. Dr. Chen worked with swift, practiced precision, while Jasmine managed the broader care, transfusions, medications, constant vigilance over vitals that threatened to crash. When Dr. Chen finally stepped back and pulled off her bloody gloves, dawn was breaking outside the windows. He'll survive, she said, exhaustion clear in her voice. But he needs intensive monitoring for the next 48 hours minimum. The next 12 are critical. Jin-woo sagged against the wall, closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them and looked at Jasmine, she saw something she'd never seen in him before. Vulnerability. Thank you, he said quietly. Both of you. Dr. Chen nodded curtly. My fee will be transferred as usual. Miss Carter, you performed well for a student. You have steady hands. She glanced at Jin-woo. I'll return in 6 hours to check his progress. Call immediately if anything changes. She left without ceremony. Jasmine stood beside the table, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much blood was on her scrubs, how completely her life had just changed. Jin-woo was still across from her, on the other side of his mentor's unconscious form, looking at her with an intensity that made something twist in her chest. That man raised me, Jin-woo said quietly. After my father died, he taught me everything about leadership, about strategy, about survival. Without him, I wouldn't exist. He moved around the table slowly, approaching her. Dr. Chen is one of the best trauma surgeons money can buy, but she told me before you arrived that she doubted a student would have the nerve for this. You proved her wrong. You didn't hesitate. You didn't panic. You did exactly what needed to be done. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell coffee and copper and expensive cologne. For a long moment, he just studied her face, and Jasmine felt like she was being evaluated at a level she couldn't quite comprehend. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed his hand over hers, a gesture that felt far more intimate than any words. I chose correctly, he said softly. When I gave you that phone, I thought I was securing a resource. What I actually found was someone exceptional, someone I can trust completely. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. You've proven yourself more valuable than you understand, and I protect what's valuable to me. Always. Jasmine was too exhausted to fully process the implications, but she understood the essential truth. She'd crossed a line tonight that couldn't be uncrossed. She wasn't just a student he was sponsoring anymore. She was inside his world now, entangled in ways she couldn't escape. "There's a guest room upstairs," Jin-woo said, releasing her hand. "Sleep. I'll have someone wake you to check on him. Your classes today have been handled. You're officially sick. You can't just—" "I can and I have," he interrupted, gently but firmly. "You saved a life tonight, Jasmine. Let me handle the logistics." She was too drained to argue. A staff member, a quiet older woman who asked no questions, led Jasmine to a luxurious guest suite and showed her to a marble bathroom where she could shower. Fresh clothes appeared on the bed while she stood under scalding water, watching blood swirl down the drain, trying to process what had just happened. When she finally collapsed into the impossibly soft bed, her last conscious thought was that she'd just become something she didn't have a name for yet. Not a student. Not an employee. Something else entirely. Something bound to Park Jin-woo in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Whatever she'd become, there was no going back to who she'd been before tonight. Jasmine didn't see Jin-woo for 3 days after saving his mentor. She returned to her studio apartment, exhausted and shaken, trying to process what she'd done. She'd performed emergency surgery in a crime boss's private medical suite. She'd saved a man's life while the most dangerous person she'd ever met handed her instruments. The weight of it pressed on her chest every time she tried to study. On the 4th morning, she found an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a new lease agreement for a place she'd never seen, already signed by a landlord, with her name printed in the tenant field. The address was in Riverside Towers, the secured high-rise near campus that she'd walked past 100 times, knowing she could never afford it. There was also a handwritten note on plain white paper, his script neat and controlled. "Your current residence is compromised. You have been relocated effective immediately. Movers will arrive at 2 p.m. today. Do not refuse this. PJW." Jasmine stared at the note, her hands shaking with anger. He'd just decided, made arrangements for her life like she was a chess piece he was repositioning. She grabbed her phone, not the encrypted one, but her regular cell, and realized she didn't even have a normal number for him. He'd made sure of that. She was furious, but she was also trapped. By 2:15, professional movers were efficiently packing her belongings, and by 5 p.m., she was standing in a furnished 2-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, her textbooks already arranged on built-in shelves she hadn't asked for. The encrypted phone rang at 7 p.m. She answered, her voice cold. "You can't just move people, Jin-woo." "I can when their safety depends on it," he replied calmly. "My mentor is awake. He's asking to meet the person who saved him. I'm sending a car in 30 minutes. I'm not coming." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had an edge she hadn't heard before. "Jasmine, I am asking, not commanding. Please." The please disarmed her completely. She closed her eyes. 30 minutes. The estate felt different at night, less clinical and more like an actual home. Jin-woo met her at the entrance himself, not in his usual suit, but in a simple black sweater and dark jeans. He looked younger, less armored. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "This matters to him. To me." He led her to a private sitting room where his mentor, Mr. Yoon, she learned, sat in a leather chair, still pale but alert, an IV stand beside him. The elderly man's eyes lit up when he saw her. "Miss Carter," he said, in accented English, his voice warm despite its weakness. "Jin-woo tells me you refused payment for saving my life." "I was already under contract, sir," Jasmine replied, feeling oddly shy under his knowing gaze. "A contract for medical services," Mr. Yoon said, smiling. "Not for facing trauma surgery in the middle of the night with inadequate equipment. Jin-woo also tells me you're angry about your housing situation." Jasmine shot Jin-woo a look. He stood by the window, his expression unreadable. "He made that decision without asking me," she said carefully. "Because he's terrified," Mr. Yoon said simply. "In our world, Miss Carter, knowledge is vulnerability. You know his face, his location, his most trusted relationships. That makes you either an asset or a liability. He chose to make you an asset, and assets must be protected." The old man leaned forward slightly. But he did it clumsily, like a man who's forgotten how to ask instead of command. "Perhaps you could teach him that skill." Jin-woo's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Jasmine found herself unexpectedly charmed by the old man's directness. "I'll consider it," she said softly. "Good," Mr. Yoon said, settling back. "Now, I'm told you're studying to be a nurse practitioner. Tell me about your plans after graduation." They talked for an hour, about medicine, about her grandmother, about the challenges of clinical rotations. Mr. Yoon was sharp, insightful, asking questions that made her think deeply about her goals. Jin-woo remained by the window, listening silently, and Jasmine occasionally caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When Mr. Yoon finally tired, Jin-woo walked her to the entrance. The night air was cool, fragrant with jasmine from the garden. "He likes you," Jin-woo said. "He never talks that long with anyone anymore." "He's wise," Jasmine replied, "and he sees right through you." Jin-woo smiled, an actual, genuine smile that transformed his face. He always has. "It's why I trust him." He hesitated, then said, "The apartment. I should have discussed it with you first, but the alternative was leaving you vulnerable, and I—" He stopped, searching for words. "I couldn't accept that risk." "Because I'm valuable to your operation," Jasmine said, testing him. "Because you're valuable to me," he corrected quietly. "There's a difference." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to fully address. "I'll stay in the apartment," Jasmine said finally. "But next time, ask first." "Agreed," he said. And she could tell the concession cost him something. Over the following weeks, Jasmine fell into a new rhythm. She attended classes during the day, studied in her new apartment, which she had to admit was infinitely better for her focus, and returned to the estate 3 times a week to check on Mr. Yoon's recovery. The old man was healing well, his dry humor and sharp observations making the visits feel less like medical appointments and more like conversations with a favorite professor. Jin-woo was always there during her visits, hovering in the background, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls between them began to erode. He started asking about her classes, her clinical rotations, genuinely interested in the medical procedures she was learning. She started asking about his work, carefully, never pushing too far, and he would occasionally offer glimpses into his world. How he'd inherited the organization, young after his father's death. How Mr. Yoon had taught him everything about strategy and restraint. How he viewed his role less as a criminal enterprise and more as a governing body for people the legal system had abandoned. One evening, Jasmine arrived to find Jin-woo alone in the medical suite, Mr. Yoon having been cleared to move to his own home that morning. Jin-woo was sitting in the chair she usually used for examinations, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. He looked exhausted. "Are you okay?" she asked, setting down her bag. He opened his eyes. Long week. A territorial dispute that required delicate negotiation. He straightened, wincing slightly, and she noticed him favoring his left side. "You're hurt," she said, immediately shifting into clinical mode. "Let me see." "It's nothing, just bruised ribs from—" "Let me see," she repeated firmly, the command in her voice brooking no argument. After a moment's hesitation, he stood and lifted his sweater, revealing a torso that was muscled and marked with several old scars, and one fresh, angry bruise spreading across his ribs like spilled ink. Jasmine inhaled sharply. "This needs to be wrapped. You could have a fracture." "I've had broken ribs before. This isn't broken." "You're not the medical professional here," she said sharply, already pulling supplies from the cabinet. "Sit down and let me work." She'd touched him before. Brief professional contact during Mr. Yoon's surgery. But this was different. She was alone with him in the quiet suite, her hands moving carefully over his skin, feeling for abnormalities, wrapping the compression bandage with practiced efficiency. She was acutely aware of his breathing, the heat radiating from his body, the way he watched her face as she worked. "Why do you do this?" she asked quietly, securing the bandage. "You're intelligent, educated. You could do anything." "I do what I was born to do," he replied. "My father built this organization to protect our community when no one else would. When he died, the responsibility became mine." He caught her hand as she started to pull away, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. "Why do you want to be a nurse practitioner? You're intelligent enough for medical school, for surgery." "Nurse practitioners work with communities," Jasmine said, very aware of his touch but not pulling away. "They provide care to people who fall through the cracks. It's about access, not prestige." "You want to help people who've been overlooked," he said slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The ones society deems unworthy of attention." "Yes." "Then perhaps we're not so different, you and I." His thumb traced a slow circle on the inside of her wrist, directly over her pulse. "We both serve the forgotten." The parallel was uncomfortable and seductive all at once. "I don't hurt people," Jasmine said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You heal people I would otherwise have to hurt," Jin-woo countered. "You give me alternatives to violence. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" He stood, still holding her wrist, closing the distance between them until she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You are the most dangerous person I've ever brought into my organization, Jasmine Carter." "I'm not dangerous," she whispered. "You are," he insisted, his voice dropping low. "Because you make me want things I can't afford to want. You make me imagine futures I have no right to imagine." His free hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. "And I am a man who always takes what I want." He kissed her then, not the possessive claim she'd expected, but something questioning, almost tentative, giving her the space to refuse. She didn't refuse. She leaned into it, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and rapid beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, and she tasted coffee and something darker, something that was purely him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jin-woo rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates everything," he murmured. "I know," Jasmine replied, but she didn't step back. "I can't promise you safety. I can't promise you normal. I stopped expecting normal the night I found your wallet." He laughed softly, the sound reverberating through his chest where her hand still rested. "That was the best mistake I ever made." They stood there for a long moment, neither quite ready to acknowledge what had just shifted between them. Finally, Jin-woo stepped back, his hand trailing down her arm before releasing her. "I should take you home. I can call a car." Jasmine said, but she didn't move toward her bag. "I'll take you home," he repeated, and this time it wasn't a command. It was an offer, and she accepted it. For the next 2 weeks, they existed in a strange liminal space, not quite together, but no longer simply bound by contract. Jin-woo would text her on her regular phone now, simple messages. "Have you eaten?" Or, "Good luck with your exam." She found herself smiling at her phone like a teenager, then feeling ridiculous about it. Then the encrypted phone rang at 4:17 a.m., shattering the fragile peace. Jasmine answered, her heart already pounding. "Hello, I need you." Jin-woo's voice was tight, controlled but urgent. "Industrial fire in the garment district. 3 of my people are trapped inside with severe burns. Emergency services can't know they were there. The building was being used for undocumented purposes. I have a medical transport team, but you need someone who can do triage and make immediate treatment decisions." Jasmine finished, already out of bed, pulling on clothes with one hand. "Where do I meet the transport?" "Jasmine, this is dangerous. Active fire, potential structural collapse. I'm calling because I have no other options, but I need you to know the risk." "Where do I meet the transport?" she repeated firmly. A pause. "Downstairs. 2 minutes." He hesitated. "Thank you." She'd expected the black Range Rover. Instead, a modified ambulance waited, its lights off, a stern-faced woman in tactical gear at the wheel. Jasmine climbed in back, where a full emergency setup was installed, better equipped than many hospital ERs she'd trained in. "I'm Dr. Han," the woman said as they pulled out. "Trauma surgeon. Mr. Park wanted medical oversight on scene. I handle the critical cases. You handle triage and stabilization of the less severe. Can you do that?" The fact that Jin-woo had called in an actual trauma surgeon showed how serious this was. "Yes," Jasmine said, checking the equipment, her training overriding her fear. "What's the injury profile?" 3 victims, thermal burns, smoke inhalation, unknown severity until we assess." The drive took 12 minutes. The garment district was old industrial buildings, repurposed into sweatshops and storage facilities. One building was billowing smoke, fire engines screaming in the distance, but still blocks away. Jin-woo's people had set up a perimeter in an alley behind the building, away from public view. Jasmine jumped out of the ambulance and immediately saw Jin-woo, his face smudged with soot, his expensive coat discarded, his white shirt torn and dirty. 3 people lay on improvised stretchers, 2 men and 1 woman, all in their 20s, all with visible burns. "Dr. Han, worst case first," Jasmine ordered immediately, her voice clear and commanding. The trauma surgeon moved to the woman, whose burns covered nearly 40% of her visible body. Jasmine went to the 2 men, doing rapid assessments. One had severe burns on his arms and chest, but his airway was clear. The other had facial burns and was struggling to breathe. Smoke inhalation, possibly airway burns. "This one first," she said, kneeling beside him. "I need oxygen, IV access, and prep for possible intubation if his airway swells." Jin-woo appeared beside her with supplies, his movements efficient despite his obvious exhaustion. "Tell me what you need." She worked for 40 minutes straight, establishing IVs, administering pain medication, wrapping burns in sterile dressings, monitoring airways. Dr. Han stabilized the woman and moved to help with the second man. The sirens grew louder, fire trucks arriving at the front of the building. "We need to move," one of Jin-woo's men said urgently. "Fire department will sweep the area." "Not yet," Jasmine said sharply. 2 more minutes. If we move him now with his airway this compromised, he could die in transport." "Jasmine," Jin-woo started. 2 minutes. she repeated, her hand steady as she adjusted the oxygen flow, watching the man's respiration rate. His breathing is stabilizing. Just 2 more minutes. Jin-woo positioned himself between her and the street, a human shield, while his men watched the perimeter. Jasmine blocked it all out, focusing only on her patient. When she finally nodded, they moved as a unit, loading all 3 patients into the ambulance in under 60 seconds. Dr. Han took the ambulance to whatever private facility Jin-woo used. Jin-woo pulled Jasmine into a black sedan that appeared from nowhere. Only when they were moving did she realize she was shaking, the adrenaline finally crashing. "You were extraordinary," Jin-woo said quietly, his hand finding hers in the dark back seat. His fingers were cold, smudged with soot. "You didn't hesitate." "People needed help," Jasmine said, her voice shaking now. "That's what I do." "That's who you are," he corrected. He pulled her closer, and she let herself collapse against his side, suddenly exhausted. "Those 3 people are alive because you refused to be rushed, because you stood your ground. Are they going to be okay? Dr. Han is the best. If anyone can save them, she will. But their chances were improved dramatically because of your triage." He pressed his lips to the top of her head, a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "You're covered in soot and you smell like smoke." "So do you," she murmured against his shirt. "Come back to the estate. Shower, rest. I'll have someone bring your class materials. You don't have to go back to your apartment tonight." She should have refused, should have insisted on maintaining boundaries. Instead, she nodded, too tired to argue, and let him take her somewhere safe. The estate's guest suite was different from before, less sterile, more personal. Someone had left clean clothes in her size, high-end loungewear that felt like silk against her skin after she showered. When she emerged, Jin-woo was sitting in the suite's living area, freshly showered himself, wearing black sweatpants and a t-shirt she'd never seen him in before. He looked human, approachable, and somehow that made him more dangerous. "Dr. Han called," he said. "All 3 are stable. You saved that man's life with your airway management. She said if you'd moved him 30 seconds earlier, they would have lost him in transport." Jasmine sank onto the couch, the reality of it hitting her. "I practiced emergency airways on dummies," she said, her voice hollow. "I've never actually managed a burn victim's airway in the field." "You did it perfectly." Jin-woo moved to sit beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You were tested tonight, Jasmine. Not by me. By circumstances. By chance. By life. And you proved something I already knew. You're not just skilled, you're exceptional under pressure." She looked at him, this man who'd turned her life upside down, who'd bought her future and bound her to his shadow world. "What are we doing, Jin-woo? This thing between us, it's not part of our agreement." "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not. Our agreement was professional. This..." He reached out and tucked a strand of her still damp hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "This is something I didn't plan for, something I didn't think I was capable of wanting." "And what do you want?" she asked, her heart hammering. "I want you safe," he said simply. "I want you educated, certified, practicing medicine. I want you to have everything you've worked for." He paused. "And I want you to choose to stay in my life, not because I'm paying you, not because of our contract, but because you want to be here." "That's a lot to want," Jasmine whispered. "I'm a man who takes what he wants," Jin-woo replied, echoing his words from weeks ago. "But not this. Not you. This you have to give freely." She should have been afraid, should have been smart enough to walk away. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, making her choice clear without words. This kiss was different from the first. No hesitation, no questions, just acceptance of whatever this dangerous thing between them was becoming. When they finally broke apart, Jin-woo rested his hand against her cheek, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Stay tonight," he said quietly. "Just sleep. Nothing more. I need to know you're safe." She stayed. She fell asleep in the massive guest bed, and when she woke at 3 a.m. from a nightmare about smoke and fire, Jin-woo was sitting in the chair by the window, watching over her. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "I sleep better, knowing you're here," he admitted. She lifted the blanket in invitation, and after a moment's hesitation, he joined her, staying on top of the covers, his arm around her shoulders as she settled against his chest. They fell asleep like that, and for the first time in months, Jasmine felt completely safe. 2 days later, Jin-woo asked her to meet him on the estate's rooftop terrace at sunset. She arrived to find a small table set with tea, not the formal setup she expected, but simple cups and a pot on a plain tray. The city sprawled below them, golden light painting the skyline. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," Jin-woo said without preamble as she sat down. "It's no longer adequate." Jasmine's stomach dropped. "Are you ending our contract? I'm proposing we change it entirely." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black box. "Before you panic, this is not a typical proposal. This is a business proposition that happens to involve marriage." He opened the box. Inside was a platinum band, simple and elegant, with a single line of Korean engraving on the inside. "In my world, alliances are sealed through marriage. It protects both parties, creates legal barriers against testifying, establishes legitimate cover for financial arrangements." He looked at her directly. "I want to marry you, Jasmine. Not because I'm romantic, though I am discovering I might be where you're concerned, but because it's the only way I can fully protect you and fully trust you." "That's..." Jasmine struggled for words. "That's insane." "Probably," he agreed calmly. "Here's what I'm offering. I will pay for your remaining education, certification, and establish you in a practice of your choosing. You will have complete financial independence. I'll set up accounts in your name only. You'll provide medical oversight for my organization and emergency care when needed, as we've already established. The marriage gives you legal protection and gives me the assurance that you're permanently bound to my interests." "That's a business transaction," Jasmine said slowly. "Not a marriage." "It's both," Jin-woo corrected. "I won't lie to you and pretend this is only business. I have feelings for you I don't fully understand. But I'm offering you something practical, because I know that's what you value. Security, independence, the freedom to practice medicine without debt. And yes, my protection, for whatever that's worth." Jasmine looked at the ring, then at him. "What does the engraving say?" "Seontaeg," he said. "It means choice, because despite everything, despite how we met, despite how I've controlled aspects of your life, this decision has to be yours, freely." She thought about her journey, from the diner where she'd found his wallet to this rooftop where he was offering her a life she'd never imagined. She thought about the past months, the terror and the thrill, the way he'd challenged her and protected her, and seen her capabilities when others only saw her struggles. "I have conditions," she said finally. His eyes lit with something like hope. "Name them." "1. I finish my education without interference. My academic decisions are mine alone." "Agreed." 2. I maintain complete medical autonomy. I decide who gets treated, how, and when, based on medical necessity. No one in your organization overrules my medical judgment." "Agreed." 3. This is a partnership. You don't make unilateral decisions about my life anymore. We discuss things. You ask, not command. Jin-woo smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually severe face. That one will be hardest for me, but agreed. And 4, Jasmine took a breath. If I do this, if I marry you, I need to know this isn't just strategy. I need to know you feel something real. Jin-woo set down the box and took both her hands in his. Jasmine Carter, I have built my entire life on control. I control my emotions, my reactions, my organization, everything. You are the first person in a decade who has made me lose that control. You terrify me because you matter in a way no one else does. So yes, this is strategy, but it's also— He paused, searching for words. It's also me trying to keep the one person who makes me want to be better than what I am. She picked up the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, substantial and cool against her skin. Then we're agreed. Partners. Partners, Jin-woo confirmed, and he kissed her as the sun set behind them, sealing their unconventional alliance with something that felt surprisingly like hope. The waitress who'd returned a wallet had become the crime boss's wife, his medical director, his equal. And in the shadows of the city below, a new kind of alliance, built on integrity, respect, and unexpected love, had begun.